As Vikir began to move the knife towards Camus' hand, she screamed in fear and called out for help from her uncle. Adolf appeared behind Vikir with a fierce expression and demanded that he back away from his niece. Camus seized the opportunity to escape from Vikir's grip and ran towards Adolf, seeking comfort from her uncle. Adolf was enraged and demanded an explanation from Hugo, asking what was going on. Hugo looked at Vikir and acknowledged that he had gone too far with his joke. Vikir then revealed that the knife was only a toy, something that was commonly played within the Baskerville family from a young age. Adolf was shocked and upset that such a dangerous toy was given to children, and he demanded an apology from Vikir. Vikir humbly apologized to Adolf and assured him that he had no intention of making Camus cry. However, Adolf was still angry and accused Vikir of not taking the situation seriously enough. But Hugo intervened and said that adults shouldn't meddle in affairs of children and attempted to diffuse the tension by changing the subject, suggesting that they focus on discussing the ruby mines and complete the friendly duels first. Adolf was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to hear Hugo out. Camus, still upset and tearful, warned Vikir that she would not forget what had happened. Vikir simply smiled faintly in response, seemingly unfazed by the situation. The day of the friendly duels had arrived, where all the children between the ages of 8 to 15 had gathered to show off their skills. While the younger children engaged in theoretical battles or displayed their mana sensitivity, the older children stole the show with their live battles. But this year all eyes were focused on the battle between two renowned clans, the Morg clan and the Baskerville clan. The two geniuses of their respective clans, Camus Morg and Vikir van Baskerville, were to showcase their skills in a practical training match. Camus instructed Vikir to get ready, emphasizing that once she was prepared, she wouldn't hold back. Without wasting any time, Camus began casting a spell, leaving the audience in awe. One spectator couldn't help but exclaim, wondering if Camus was casting quadra spells. The fact that she was able to cast 4 spells simultaneously was impressive, even more so since she was only 8 years old. Another spectator praised her, acknowledging that Camus was the genius mage of Morg, and such feats were expected of her. Camus launched an attack on Vikir, casting 4 different spells at once. However, Vikir managed to dodge all of them with ease. With a hint of criticism in his voice, Vikir suggested to Camus that instead of trying to impress with flashy spells, she should focus on mastering one. Camus sneered at Vikir, wondering why he even cared since he was just an idiot who didn't understand magic. She retaliated by using a sand wall spell, causing a wall of sand to appear between them. But Vikir easily broke through the wall with a swift kick and commented on Camus's harsh words. Camus was surprised at Vikir's strength, wondering if this was the power of someone who had bathed in the river Styx. While she was lost in thought, Vikir launched an attack that Camus realized was impossible to dodge. She closed her eyes, thinking that she had let her guard down, but to her surprise, she didn't get hit. When she opened her eyes, Vikir was flicking his finger on her forehead. The flick sent her flying backward. Adolf, who was watching, couldn't believe that a mere flick had such power. Camus tried to ease the pain on her forehead with her hand and demanded to know why Vikir had flicked her. She accused him of going easy on her and vowed not to let him get away with it. However, Vikir just smiled and pointed to his forehead, suggesting that they should end things before they got out of hand. Camus, with almost tears in her eyes, refused to give up and casted another sand wall spell. This time, she created 2 walls and proudly exclaimed that Vikir wouldn't be able to get through them. However, Vikir wasn't impressed and thought that it was pointless since he could just go around them. But he decided to play along and prepared to punch the walls. With just one punch, Vikir's hand pierced through both walls, creating a hole. Camus was surprised seeing this, and then Vikir asked a question while making a flicking gesture with his hand. He wondered whose arm had crossed the wall. As he once again flicked on Camus' forehead, he answered the question himself, saying that it was the stronger individual. The flick on Camus's forehead caused her to fall down and growl in pain. Despite this, she continued attacking Vikir, who managed to dodge her attacks. Vikir thought that dealing with children was much harder than he thought, and that he could easily crush her neck in 0.1 seconds if he put his mind to it. However, he knew that it would cause an entire issue, and wondered what he should do to calm her down. Just then Vikir noticed that 2 other contestants were having a duel in the arena behind him. He thought it might be better to let others deal with Camus. As he turned his attention to the other contestants, he saw a swordmaster cutting a mage's spells with a sword. Vikir thought that they might be useful in executing his plan. Meanwhile, Camus was getting angrier by the minute. Her attacks were not landing on Vikir, and she couldn't understand why. She demanded that Vikir stop running away and face her. As the mage behind Vikir started casting a spell, Vikir knew it was the perfect time to strike. Victor warned Camus to have a defensive spell ready. Camus was confused at first, but then she saw the mage's attack coming from behind Victor. Adolf, who understood Victor's plan, shouted in surprise, and then a powerful blast covered the whole arena. As the spell engulfed the arena, the audience reacted with gasps and shouts of surprise at what they were seeing. Lady Camus heard her uncle Adolf's voice in the chaos and wondered what she should do. She had avoided injuries with the help of a defensive spell, but the flame spell had burned her clothes. Tears welled up in her eyes as she imagined the shame of being seen after the smoke cleared. Suddenly, Victor appeared before her and offered his jacket to cover herself. Camus was shocked by his kindness, unable to understand why he was helping her despite being her enemy. She protested weakly as Victor insisted on giving her his jacket. Camus anxiously said that he would be exposed if he gave her his only jacket, but Victor seemed unconcerned about his own well-being. Camus couldn't understand why Victor was taking care of her, despite their enmity. Camus noticed that Victor was bleeding from a scratch on his arm and pointed it out to him. Victor was surprised to see a scratch on the body strengthened by the river Styx and realized that the sword of the idiot swordsman must have had some remaining aura on it to cause the wound. As the dust cloud began to clear, Camus and Victor were revealed to the audience. Adolf was relieved to see that Camus was okay, and the audience observed that the Lady of Morgue was on the floor. But the one bleeding was the young Baskerville, making it difficult to determine the winner of the battle. The audience also noticed shirtless Victor, revealing his fit physique. They marveled at his muscles, impressed by his talent for training his body at such a young age. Camus's eyes looked different as she watched Victor, and a light blush spread across her cheeks. As Adolf hugged his niece, Camus, she continued to steal glances at Victor, unable to understand why she was feeling drawn to him despite their earlier enmity. After the battle, Hugo and Victor walked down a dimly lit hallway. Hugo turned to Victor and asked how the battle with the Lady of the Morgue clan was. Victor replied that it was interesting and that he had learned the purpose of the event once again. Hugo then remarked that a battle with a mage was different from a battle between swordsmen and asked why Victor did not go for a clear blow. Victor hesitated before admitting that he was confused about how to deal with a lady. Hugo warned him that letting his guard down in battle would lead to injury, and that he should take the injury as a lesson. Victor was surprised that Hugo was worried about him. He didn't remember much about what Hugo was like during his youth since he was always so cold, strict, and brutal. There were rumors that his personality had become that way because he had lost his first wife and eldest daughter, but that wasn't Victor's problem. Hugo then changed the subject and asked Victor what he thought they should do with the ruby mines. Victor spoke up, suggesting that they give away control over the mines. Hugo was taken aback and asked for his reasoning. Victor explained that the main task of the Baskerville clan was to grow their territories, and that the monsters and barbarians living in the area around the mines would become a problem during their expansion into that region. He suggested that if they could utilize the Morgue clan well, they may be able to minimize the losses incurred during their expansion. Hugo agreed with Victor's reasoning and explained his plan. Once the Morgue clan receives control over the ruby mines, they will assign a great number of people there, and all they need to do is push the monsters and barbarians into that region. They would then be able to take care of all the problems at once, and the rubies would be bathed in the blood of their enemies. Hugo was confident that if that happened, the Morgue clan would have to think twice before entering their territory. Hugo placed his hand on Victor's head and acknowledged that Victor's idea was about 90% in line with what he had in mind. Victor, on the other hand, couldn't help but think that it was not a surprise as the idea was originally Hugo's, as Victor had executed the same plan in his past life on Hugo's orders. Victor then suggested that they should keep an eye on the Morgue's movements, but Hugo did not think it was necessary as he had already increased the number of hounds scouting the area. As Hugo and Victor were walking, Adolf's voice interrupted them, calling out to Hugo. Hugo and Victor turned their attention to Adolf as he mentioned that he had something to discuss with them before he left. They took seats in a nearby room, and Hugo asked what Adolf wanted to talk about. Adolf suggested that they peacefully resolve the issues regarding the ruby mines, and mentioned that fees for its usage was just one of many suggestions. He then proposed the idea of an engagement between the Morgue and Baskerville children. While Hugo and Adolf discussed the details, Camus was looking at Victor with a blush on her face. Hugo then asked Adolf which child he had in mind for the engagement. Adolf suggested a union between the eldest son of the Baskervilles and the eldest daughter of the Morgues, his niece Camus. He spoke highly of his niece, stating that she was an incredible child with both beauty and knowledge, lacking nothing. Adolf suggested that Camus would be a great fit for the child known as the small son of the Baskerville clan. but Hugo expressed concern about the significant age gap between his son and Camus, informing Adolf that his eldest son was 25 years old this year. Adolf didn't consider it a significant issue, as it was only a 17-year gap between them. Suddenly Camus spoke and made it clear that she wouldn't marry anyone weaker than her mother and didn't want a significant age gap in her partner. Adolf tried to persuade her by saying that she will have to live alone rest of her life if she wants to marry someone stronger than her mother. Hugo also didn't seem pleased with her attitude and reminded her that engagements weren't a buffet of her choosing. But Camus was confident in her choices and claimed she had no intention of playing around. Suddenly, her face turned red, and she looked to the side, catching the attention of Adolf and Hugo. Adolf was shocked when he realized that Camus was looking at Vikir, and started cursing him in his mind. Adolf couldn't believe what he was witnessing. He whispered to Camus, urging her not to even think about it, as Vikir was from the Van surname and not from the La descent. Adolf believed that no matter what happens, Vikir would merely be a small fish in a big pond. Hugo, on the other hand, was getting increasingly frustrated with the situation, so he decided to intervene and reminded everyone that the most important thing in engagements was what the people involved had in mind. He then turned to Vikir and asked him for his thoughts. Camus looked at Vikir, waiting for his answer. Camus and Vikir exchanged looks, and then Vikir spoke up and said, "I accept." Adolf became visibly upset at Vikir's response, but before Adolf could say anything, Vikir continued his sentence and added that "I accept to do as I'm told." Adolf was even more outraged at this, wondering how someone could have such an attitude towards the daughter of the Moor clan. On the other hand, Camus was blushing from head to toe, wondering what Vikir's response meant. She couldn't help but wonder if he was shyer than he portrayed himself to be and if he wasn't opposed to the idea of their engagement. Hugo stated that names and titles had no meaning in the Baskerville household, and that great people come from those of Van descent, not just those of La descent. However, Adolf seemed skeptical about this statement, especially when it came to Vikir. Adolf stood in front of Vikir, examining him closely. Vikir, in turn, looked back at Adolf and thought about his reputation as a sixth circle master and one of the strongest mage within the renowned clan and supporter of his niece. Adolf then spoke up, saying that he didn't think it's quite wise to tell Vikir this, but they couldn't have just anyone become Camus' husband. Vikir thought about how engagement was merely a suggestion between clans and wondered if Adolf was not satisfied with even the genius of the Baskerville clan. Adolf then placed his hand on Vikir's shoulder and tried to press him down, but Vikir didn't budge. Adolf was surprised by Vikir's sturdy body. Adolf then asked Vikir why he wasn't answering him and was he even listening to him, and Vikir replied that he hadn't been listening to him since he said it wasn't wise to tell him something. Camus was shocked at Vikir's reply, especially since he said it to her uncle, who was one of the strongest mage. On the side, Hugo tried to control his laughter in the midst of the tense situation. Vikir's response caused Adolf to laugh menacingly. He turned to Hugo and requested to have a deeper conversation with Vikir. Hugo questioned Adolf's intentions and asked if he was going to scold an 8-year-old child. However, Adolf responded with a laugh, stating that Vikir may become his niece's future husband and that he was making the request as an uncle rather than as the deputy patriarch of the Moor clan. Camus tried to stop his uncle and pleaded with him not to do this, but Adolf ignored her and claimed that this was bound to happen to someone eventually. He then turned back to Hugo, asking him to grant him the opportunity to have a conversation with Vikir. Hugo reluctantly agreed, saying that if Adolf was that adamant, he could have his chance to have a deeper conversation with the child. But it turned out that this deeper conversation wasn't a talk but a duel. Vikir and Adolf stood facing each other in an arena while Hugo and Camus watched from the sidelines. Adolf announced that he would be testing Vikir's abilities and instructed him to show everything he was capable of. Vikir agreed, but thought to himself that if he showed everything, Adolf might pass out. Adolf then casted a spell and started creating a pot. Camus explained that his uncle was making a pot using fire, earth, and water magic simultaneously with perfect control, which was typical of her powerful uncle. Adolf then filled the pot with water and placed the pot on his own head and challenged Vikir to a duel. He instructed Vikir that if he could make a single drop of water fall from the pot, it would be considered a victory. Vikir observed the pot and thought about how challenging an opponent like Adolf would be a great experience, and thought about his own win rate against Adolf prior to his regression. Vikir analyzed the situation and calculated that an assassination attempt would have a 50% chance of success, and a 10% win rate if he were to face Adolf head-on. Vicar decided to approach the situation carefully, knowing that he only needed to do enough to satisfy Hugo's expectations, and also he wanted to see what Adolf was truly capable of. Without warning, Vicar charged at Adolf with his sword in hand, running in a straight line towards him. Camus, who was watching from the side, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She shouted at Vicar, telling him that he couldn't run straight towards Adolf. As Vicar's sword came crashing down towards Adolf, he cast a barrier spell, blocking the attack. Adolf was amused at Vicar's attempt, and questioned Camus as to why she was helping Vicar, while saying that shield magic was best used against swordsmen. Adolf knew that it would be difficult for Vicar to pierce through with most aura swords. Vicar was frustrated with the failed attack and clicked his tongue in annoyance. Adolf decided to take the offensive and started casting spells towards Vicar. Vicar, being nimble and quick, started dodging the spells effortlessly. Camus interjected, exclaiming that it was unfair as Adolf never used this level of magic against her in their duels. Adolf was taken aback by Camus' support of Vicar and asked her whose side she was on. He then turned to Vicar with a crying face, calling him a bastard and promising not to forgive him. Hugo watched the battle unfold, analyzing the two combatants. He noted that Vicar was attacking at a speed that was difficult but not impossible to dodge, and decided there was no need to intervene. He wanted to see what Vicar was capable of, and show the old man what a young hound could do. As Vicar dodged Adolf's spells, he analyzed his opponent's abilities. He knew that he could use his knowledge from before his regression and his current age to gain an advantage. Adolf smirked at Vicar, claiming that his sword would never pierce through his shield. However, Vicar's attacks began to break the shield, catching Adolf off guard. Adolf noticed that Vicar was attacking at the same point on the shield with his sword and was impressed by Vicar's machine-like movements and swordsmanship. As Vicar was attacking with his sword, it suddenly broke into pieces, causing Adolf to smirk and taunt him about his lack of consideration for the durability of his sword and the strength of his shield. However, Hugo and Camus, who were watching from the sidelines, had shocked expressions on their faces. Adolf continued to speak, unaware of the surprised reactions of those around him. Suddenly, water started pouring on his face, completely covering his head in a matter of seconds. Adolf shouted in surprise, wondering how a piece of the broken sword had managed to pierce the pot and drench him with water. Vicar, with a smile on his face, commented that the pot seemed to be full. Camus, who witnessed the unexpected turn of events, blushed and exclaimed in disbelief that Vicar had won against her uncle and started thinking about the possibility of marriage. Meanwhile, Hugo, who was standing beside Camus, realized that the incident with the broken sword was not just a coincidence, but a sign of Vicar's exceptional talent and strength. He couldn't help but wonder if he was raising a much stronger hound than he had initially anticipated. 7 years had passed since the young hounds first stepped foot in the Baskerville training grounds. Today, they faced a fierce monster that resembled a bear with horns. As the monster charged at them, the young hounds attacked it with their swords, one after another. Watching from the sidelines was Baskerville Clan Shadow Hound Staffordshire Baskerville, the instructor of the young hounds. He knew that facing opponents stronger than them was a daunting task, so he shouted out instructions to the young hounds, telling them to aim for the hind leg to slow down the monster instead of targeting the vital points from the beginning. The triplets among the young hounds coordinated their strikes, leaving the monster exhausted. Staffordshire was impressed and thought to himself that their dark crimson aura was very suitable for the Baskervilles. After the triplets had weakened the monster, the other young hounds resumed their attacks and finished it off. Staffordshire applauded the young hounds and congratulated them on becoming low-rank sword experts and masters of the first Baskerville technique. Staffordshire reminded the young hounds that they were facing a caged monster and that the wild ox bear on La Rouge-et-Lenoir Mountain would be quite different. He warned them that death could occur much more easily than they thought, and they must use their bloodline to overcome it or build their experience to survive somehow. With that, the instructor concluded the 7-year training and congratulated the young hounds on their graduation. He wished them good luck in their future endeavors. After the successful completion of their training, the young hounds started chatting among themselves. 2 hounds were discussing their preferences for the various night orders within the Baskerville clan. The first hound mentioned that he preferred the Wolfhound order, while the second hound shared his choices: Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler. There were 7 night orders in the Baskerville clan, each established and managed for various objectives, such as watching, searching, guarding, assassinating, suppressing, and all-out warfare. Suddenly, the first hound asked his companion where he thought that bastard would go. The second hound asked in confusion who was he referring to. The first hound clarified that he was referring to the person sitting on the dead ox bear, who is none other than Vicar. They continued their conversation about Vicar, with one hound saying that Vicar had defeated a much larger ox bear than the one they had just faced, and that he was already a high-rank sword expert at the 3rd Baskerville technique, which meant that he was at the Shadow Hound's level. Vicar sat on the dead ox bear, lost in thought. He knew it had taken longer than he had anticipated to reach his current level, which was graduate intermediate rank at the 5th Baskerville technique. While his swordsmanship had improved greatly, he felt his growth was much slower than he had hoped for. Suddenly, head butler Barrymore appeared behind Vicar and addressed him as Master Vicar. The butler informed Vicar that the Patriarch was looking for him and that his assignment had been decided. Vicar, with a serious expression on his face, replied with a simple "all right." Vicar entered the Patriarch's office and greeted Hugo. However, he only received a grunt in response. Vicar noticed a cut on Hugo's nose and asked him what had happened. Hugo replied that he had been subjugating barbarians on La Rouge et Lenoir mountain, and that one of the archers had gotten the better of him. Vicar asked if he had captured them, but Hugo replied that he had not. However, he did manage to give the archer the same scar on her face. After a moment of silence, Hugo congratulated Vicar on graduating. However, his tone was ominous when he added that it was only going to get harder. Vicar wondered if Hugo was going to talk about the assignment now as he reminisced about his past before his regression. He had been a junior knight of the Pitbull Order, and was sent to the treacherous La Rouge et Lenoir mountain to face death non-stop for 21 months. He had been like an expendable mutt, immediately dispatched into battle upon his arrival. He remembered that the Baskerville children were categorized as either elite or expendable once they reached the age of 15. The expendables were sent to die in battle, while the elite were educated about politics and administration. Through numerous brushes with death, the experienced expendables eventually became guards to the elite, while the elite matured over time through practicing politics and administration. Vicar knew that the 5th Baskerville technique existed to let the elite catch up to the expendables' long hours and experiences with real-life battles. However, his swordsmanship had not been able to surpass the 4th technique prior to his regression. There was no way that Hugo, the one in charge, would let him, an illegitimate child, take a course for the elite. Vicar's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Hugo. Hugo suggested that Vicar should try the lower house of Parliament. Not fully understanding what Hugo meant, Vicar asked for clarification. Hugo explained that the lower house of Parliament assisted the Baskerville clan's regional administration, legislature, and law enforcement, as well as inviting businesses and looking after the region as necessary. Simply put, they managed both small and large matters of the clan. Vicar was surprised that Hugo had selected him, an illegitimate child, to take the elite course. Hugo continued, saying that Vicar's achievements were greater than any child who was referred to as a genius by 10 years. So, he would treat Vicar as such. The position that Vicar would be taking was the deputy consul of the underdog city. Currently, both the consul and deputy consul positions were vacant. Hugo asked Vicar if he would like to try it. After considering Hugo's proposal, Vicar decided to accept the position of deputy consul of the underdog city. However, before proceeding, he wanted to discuss an incident involving the Morg clan and the Ruby Mines. Hugo seemed to know about it already and referred to how Vicar screwed over Adolf Morg. Vicar confirmed this and asked if he could borrow his reward once. Even though what Vicar wanted to borrow was still not revealed yet, the head butler, who had an idea about it, was shocked at Vicar's bold request. But Hugo didn't seem to mind. He stamped a paper and assured Vicar that he trusted him not to do anything foolish. With confidence, Vicar promised he wouldn't make Hugo worry, but he couldn't help but think how strange it was to be called son by Hugo, something that would have been unimaginable before his regression. As head butler and Vicar walked down the hallway, the head butler spoke in a serious tone. He emphasized the Patriarch's high regard for Vicar, as evidenced by his appointment as a consul prior to being dispatched into battle. The head butler referred to this as the disciplines of kingship, suggesting that Vicar was being groomed for greater responsibilities in the future. However, Vicar was not complacent about his new role. He acknowledged that success was not guaranteed and that he would have to work hard to manage his responsibilities as deputy consul. Vicar thought to himself that this was an opportunity for him to hone his skills more safely. He wasn't particularly interested in current events, but his memories from his previous life were still vivid. He remembered the sensation of his head being severed from his body by the guillotine. Vicar decided at that moment that he will let Hugo Le Baskerville feel the same sensation. In the Baskerville territory, Underdog, in a large villa, a bald man gave orders to 2 workers, instructing them to ensure that the place is perfectly clean by the next day, as a new deputy consul from the Baskerville family was coming. The workers acknowledged his orders and said yes, sir. Later on, one of the workers wondered what kind of person the new deputy consul would be and hoped that he would have experience in business. However, the other worker told him that the new deputy consul was only 15 years old. While they were talking, a young boy was approaching the villa, and the second worker noticed him. He placed his hand on the kid's shoulder and wondered whose child he was and if any employee had brought him. The worker then told the boy that he couldn't just enter the villa freely. It turned out, the young boy who had approached the villa was none other than Vikir. With an angry look on his face, he ordered the worker to remove his hand from his shoulder. Then, he pulled out a paper and showed it to the worker, who was surprised to see that it was the document verifying Vikir's position as the new deputy consul. The workers were confused as to why he had come a day early, but Vikir was not concerned about that. He ordered the workers to prepare food and drinks for a party he was going to have. As Vikir entered the villa, both workers had questioning looks on their faces and wondered why the new deputy consul was planning a party. Soon, the party began, and the whole villa was filled with food and drinks. Many nobles were in attendance, enjoying the festivities and talking with one another. Chihuahua Baskerville, the general secretary of the city of Underdog, was pacing back and forth in his office, clearly agitated. He looked out the window and couldn't believe what he saw. The new deputy consul, a young man who had just started working for the city, was holding a party at the workplace. Chihuahua was already having a hard time because all of his predecessors had been dismissed for accepting bribes. And now, this guy was drinking and partying on the job. Chihuahua couldn't believe the audacity of this troublemaker. As he was about to express his frustration, Vikir suddenly appeared behind him and asked if he was the general secretary. The sudden interruption startled him and he almost jumped out of his skin. He was surprised to see Vikir and wondered how long he had been standing there. Vikir introduced himself as Vikir van Baskerville, the new deputy consul, and Chihuahua introduced himself as Chihuahua Baskerville. Vikir repeated Chihuahua's name, noting that he didn't have a middle name. Chihuahua thought to himself that it was going to happen again. He knew that a lack of a middle name signified that he was from outside the family and that he was employed rather than a blood member of the family. Chihuahua had to deal with discrimination from deputy consuls because of this. He was tired of being looked down upon and treated unfairly because he wasn't born into the family. But Chihuahua was surprised by Vikir's response. Instead of mocking him, Vikir placed his hand on Chihuahua's shoulder and simply said, "Nice." This threw Chihuahua off guard, and he responded with a confused look. Vikir went on to explain that he had scanned through Chihuahua's personal information on the way there, and had noticed that he was from Underdog. Chihuahua agreed with him, saying that he was born and raised in the current place they were in. Vikir acknowledged this and mentioned that he knew how hard people like him had to work and that he didn't intend to interfere with how he did his job. Chihuahua was still a bit confused but responded with an awkward okay. Chihuahua couldn't help but think that was this some new form of harassment, and wondered why Vikir was even there in the first place when he was the one who asked for the party. But Vikir continued, mentioning that while the personal law system itself didn't have a problem, there were many strange things about the judicial system. Vikir continued speaking, explaining that the problem with Underdog was that many illegal business owners were successful, and as a result, the underground held the power above the law. Simply stopping the illegal businesses wouldn't resolve the problem. The heads of the underground businesses needed to be removed. As a deputy consul, his job was to make laws and execute them, and while he respected all the laws that were already in place, he intended to add a new one. Chihuahua exclaimed in surprise as he heard the word new law. Vikir nodded and explained that he would make sure the underground economy was in shambles within a week. However, he needed a cause in order to make and execute this law. Chihuahua couldn't understand why Vikir needed a cause for getting rid of illegal businesses. Vikir explained that he was still young and a newly appointed deputy consul. He needed a performance in order to make it more convincing. Chihuahua still didn't fully understand Vikir's plan. Vikir looked out of window as his expression turned into an evil grin, and he said that to put it differently, I will lay out poop for the flies. Chihuahua couldn't help but wonder what Vikir was planning. The next day, Vikir arrived at Doorsmile Street in downtown Underdog. A huge crowd had already gathered there and people were chatting among themselves. Vikir stood on the stage with a stake in his hand. Chihuahua and his companions wondered what the deputy consul was planning to do. They commented that there were a lot of people there, and that the deputy consul had been standing there since the crack of dawn. Suddenly, Vikir stepped forward and announced that he was the newly appointed deputy consul. The crowd was surprised to see such a young man as the deputy consul, and wondered what he was going to do. Some of them murmured that he was cute, while some questioned what a young man like him could do. Vikir ignored the crowd and said, I believe you have all seen this notice. These are laws that have been in place for a while. Even if the deputy consul has changed, the Baskerville family's laws are still strict as before and will continue to be upheld. However, the crowd did not seem to have any faith in Vicker's words. They muttered among themselves, questioning his ability to carry out laws at such a young age. Some even commented on the corruption of the higher-ups and thought that Vicker would soon fall victim to it. Chihuahua, who stood by Vicker's side, could no longer remain silent. He shouted at the crowd, demanding that they show respect to the new deputy consul. The crowd fell silent, but some still doubted Vicker's ability to uphold the laws, and they thought that Chihuahua might be a better choice for the position of deputy consul. Suddenly, Vicker's actions had the entire crowd in a state of shock. As he pulled up the stake, whole crowd fell silent, and all eyes were fixed on him. With immense power, Vicker then plunged the stake into the ground with such force that the earth around it seemed to shake. The crowd could hardly believe what they were seeing. They were amazed at the sheer strength that Vicker had displayed. But then, Vicker announced something that took everyone by surprise. He said that he would announce a special law, with his authority as a deputy consul known as the Vicker Special Law, which would award 100 million gold to anyone who could remove the stake from the ground. The entire crowd looked at Vicker and the stake in disbelief, trying to analyze what was happening. Suddenly, the crowd erupted into a loud chorus of disbelief, shouting, 100 million. Thanks for watching the video. The next part will be added here once it's uploaded. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you're always the first to know when I post something new.